Welcome, friends. Thanks for joining me. My name is Leon Pittard. I'm the host of Fairdinkum Radio. We are broadcasting from the land down under in Australia. Well, today we are bringing you the voice of the people, the voice of an Australian who has been through a harrowing time over the past decade. Warren McLachlan is my guest. Warren's story is really a warning, I guess, for many people contemplating marrying someone from another country and the potential things that can happen. Warren's joined me to tell his story. Warren, thanks for joining me on Fairdinkum Radio, mate. We appreciate it.
No worries, Leon. Happy to be here.
Well, Warren, for the sake of our listeners, let's start with, I guess, where your story began with meeting your new wife. Talk to us about how you met your wife, and then we can lead into the subsequent events that followed. And I will direct my listeners to the fact that you have written a book called The Dark Side of Finland, and we will put those links on the show notes so that people can indeed buy your book and be fully informed about it. But today, for the 60 minutes we've got together, we are going to do a summary of your story. So let's begin with how you actually come to meet your wife and getting married, moving into having your children.
Okay, Leon. Well, in the year 1998, I took a holiday to Europe, and I ended up in Finland, and I met a woman named Kaisu, and I found her very attractive, and I fell in love with her, and we got married, and it was a very fun or a very wonderful time for me. And I remember walking down the street in Finland, drawing smiley faces on the windscreens of cars. I was very happy. So anyway, then we got married in Finland, and I brought her back to Australia, and our first son, William, he was born in November 1998, and he was a handsome, intelligent, healthy child. And in the beginning of 1999, I noticed that Kaisu was homesick, so I sent her and baby William back to Finland to visit her family, and they came back about a month later, and everything was fine. But I noticed with Kaisu that she was easily angered, and she simply wanted to. William was full of life, and he was crawling around our home, and he would crawl into the kitchen cupboards and throw everything on the floor, and then she'd put it all back in, and he'd crawl back in and throw it all on the floor again. I thought this was quite funny, and Kaiser would start the vacuum cleaner up, and he would pounce on it. And I don't know how he did it, but he managed to break the controls without any visible sign of damage. But it was still work, but only on one speed, and it let out an ugly howl. And years later, it burnt out, let out a horrible stink, and it set off the fire alarm. But I never worried about it. I just thought he was, a real champ, But one day he was about 8 months old, and he crawled over to me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, and he grabbed the hairs on my legs and stood himself up. And I was impressed. I never knew I had so much hair on my legs, but obviously he thought so. But anyway, he was a great kid, full of life. And Kaisu, she simply found him to be a burden, and she wanted him to sit still and shut up. So she began punishing him. She would scream at him and slap him and pinch him and bite him and grab his hair, and I always stopped her whenever I was close enough to do so, but I didn't know what to do about it, because whenever I tried to get her to behave, it provoked her. And so I don't know, I didn't want to lose my wife, I didn't want to lose my son, and so life went on, and in year 2000, we bought a house, and then in late 2001, Kaisu took baby William to Finland again, and in November 2001, and then in December 2001, she phoned me from Finland, and she said, "I'm pregnant." And I said, well, that's wonderful, you know. And then in January 2002, she phoned me from Finland and said, well, I'm too sick to fly home. And then she was too pregnant to fly home. And then she was, then she'd be home, said she'd be home after the christening. And then, she, applied for a divorce. And then she said that there was a possibility to save our marriage if I came to Finland. And so, Mikhail was born in July 2002. And, so anyway, this was August by this time. So I worked very hard for the rest of the year, and I saved my money, and I landed in Finland in January 2003. And I said to Kaisu, Kaisu said to me, I only promised you the chance to save our marriage to delay a Hague application for international child abduction. And so then I said, well, can I have the birth certificate? And she said no. And so I went to the hospital, and they said no. And I couldn't make sense of that because we were married and I had a passport and, you know, I was the father, but no. So I ended up tracking down some other government department, and the man, he gave it to me, the birth certificate, and he told me that Kaisu had been seeking the assistance of the Finnish government legal system, and they had advised her to all these stalling tactics to make it harder for me to make a successful Hague application. So that was what that was about.
Moran, if I could just interrupt here for a moment and just ask, were you aware before Kaisu, your wife, went to Finland for this holiday, were you aware that there was problems, you know, like with your marriage? Was there any indication? Like, it sounds a little bit like maybe she had postnatal depression or something after the first baby. Do you think that maybe she did have postnatal depression and that's why she was unable to cope with the child's active life? He was obviously a very active child, and it seems like she couldn't cope with that.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what it was, Leon. I mean, she always had a bad temper, and she was easily annoyed. But I don't know. I think she was just lazy, and but you know, we did fight over William, you know, and that was a source of argument. And she was very homesick, so I guess. You know, she decided, well, I want to stay in Finland and to hell with him, you know, and that's about it.
And so the first real indication that you had that things were really bad was when, you know, she basically said to you, you know, she's staying over there, and meanwhile you're back here in Australia working, and your second child was born while you were over here. I mean, that must have really affected you, knowing your child was being born overseas, and here you were over here working. You had to work to save money to go and visit your own child.
Well, you know, I wasn't happy about it, but at least I was happy with the fact that he was a handsome, intelligent, healthy child, and I haven't had much opportunity to know him, but he does seem to be more docile or less wild, perhaps, is the way to describe it, than William. And so I think consequently he wasn't subjected to as much beating as his brother. And I think plus the fact that William has been traumatized by basically being kidnapped, whereas Mikhail has never lived in Australia and you know, never known his Australian family, so he has nothing to miss. And that was very disturbing for William, but also I do believe that she beat him. I'm just guessing. She beat him a lot more than Mikhail. William, by the age of 3, was actually hitting her back, and in 2004 I obtained a photo from a friend in Finland, and it shows William in handcuffs, and I do believe that the handcuffs are real. It does appear that that Kaisu was involved in this, and it does appear that she handcuffed him because he was hitting her back. And so after this years basically of physical torment by his mother, she took him to the social workers and said, well, look, there's something wrong with this kid. Look at he's violent. And so the social workers quickly fed him to the psychiatrists, and they were very happy to have another customer. And, so she was a very willing accomplice in all this. And so basically, inch by inch, the social workers and psychiatrists just took custody of the children. And in 2000, it actually began in 2002 when Kaisu and the children were living in some kind of social worker home because Kaisu was complaining that she was unable to cope with the children because it was too hard for her. And so it began then. But, there's a long paper trail that I don't only have a partial access to, but I suspect that there have been perhaps 5 or 10 foster homes and maybe 5 or 10 psychiatric hospitals and social worker homes and whatever. I've only got part of the story. They're very reluctant to give me documents. Kaisu divorced me in a Finnish court in 2003, and I hired a Finnish lawyer, and there were two things that I wanted. Well, first I wanted the children back, and that didn't happen. And then I told the lawyer, well, if I can't get them back, I want 1 month's custody per year, and I want unlimited access to government information about my children. And I did get that. However, these social workers and psychiatrists, they routinely they didn't care. When I landed in Finland in 2004 for the first 1 month custody in the summer of 2004, the Finnish summer, I said, well, can I have my 1 month's custody? And Kaisu and the psychiatrists, they said, well, we don't actually care about the court order, and no, you can't. And so they're just basically spitting in the face of the law. And so it was a bit ridiculous in that I went to sort out a lawyer to start a second court case to improve my parental rights. And, well, number one, get custody back. Number two, improve my parental rights. But I was also aiming for, if I couldn't get my children back, at least they could be placed in the care of the closest possible of their many Finnish family members. And we had 50 of them at our wedding in Finland. So, but I believe the reason that these social workers and psychiatrists won't give the children to a family member is because it's harder to control a family member. Like, for example, what are they going to do to a family member if they refuse to give the child the drugs that they order them to give the child? I mean, they're going to have a tough time getting the child off the family member in the courts. But a foster parent, the social workers have basically got their boot on their neck. It's like, well, if you don't, they'll blood test the kid, and as well, if you don't give him the pills, we'll take the kid off you.
Warren, if I could just ask you here, around 2004, you were divorced in 2003. What was the first knowledge you had that your child William was being given psychotropic drugs or drugs from psychiatrists that were a concern to you? When did that start to your knowledge? How old was the child?
That started in 2006, and he would have been what's that, 7 or 8? Oh no, what's that? 2, 8? Yeah, 8 or 9. But again, well, I don't know about again, but since the year 2003, I've been making criminal complaints to the Finnish Justice Department about Finnish psychiatrists, and basically I said that it's the intention of the Finnish psychiatric industry to institutionalize, drug, and brutalize my children for the term of their natural lives for the purposes of profit and social control and sadism. And I believe that centralized governments always want your kids. And I think that in the Aztec days, they were ripping children's hearts out on the public stage, and I think they did it. I think that the public was either intimidated, well, partly intimidated, no doubt, by the military, and perhaps partly brainwashed by the religion, the sun worship, the cult of sun worship, and whatever else they were into. But so they, to some degree, I think they felt that it was God's will, or but even if they didn't agree with it, the soldiers were waiting to spear them to death. But I think you track forward to the Inquisition, and I think I can imagine what those Aztec priests were doing behind closed doors to those children, But in the Inquisition, I think the public was a little bit more educated and a little bit more aware of their human rights and a little bit less ignorant about religion. So they had to do what they did to children in dungeons. But I think today, with a centralized government comes the state religion, and I believe the state religion is psychiatry. And so the public are much more educated and much more aware of their human rights. And I think the only way you can get away with it today is to put a white coat on and call yourself a doctor. And interestingly, the Inquisition officially ended in about 1880, and that was around the same time that modern psychiatry was born.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering if literally, it'd be great to research this, but I'm wondering if the Inquisition, the priests literally took off their black robes and put on white coats.
Well, absolutely. And you raise a very important point, because you raise some of the power structures of cultures in the past were dominant religions, where the religions or the religion and the priesthood basically said, look, if we can have your children, we can mould society the way that we want it. And in your experience, you've experienced this in our modern age, where the law has been used to take your children off you, and every time that you have tried to challenge their law, society's laws, to actually have what is yours by right, your children, you've found that the system itself, the collectivised, centralised system of government, has been there protecting the medical cartel against the natural rights of the parents. Yeah. Well, what I wish I had have said to the Finnish police in 2003 when I began the criminal complaints, I should have said, I want you to record this statement that I believe it's the intention of the Finnish psychiatric industry to institutionalise, drug and brutalise my children for the term of their natural lives for the purposes of social control, profit and sadism. Furthermore, this drugging, the drugging will be done without any scientific proof of illness, and I want you to record that statement and give me a copy of it and put it on file in your central computer. And I wish I had done that in 2003. I should do that next time I go there. But I no doubt they've got statements that say similar things on my behalf. But I was hoping that by, forewarning, because you see, when I was get a little bit sidetracked here, when I was a child, you may wonder how the audience may wonder how I know all this stuff. Well, as a child, I began an interest in UFOs, and I started reading books about UFOs, and I soon learned that if there was any truth in it, the best place to look would be in underground government buildings. The best place to look for evidence would be in underground government buildings, and I thought, well, there's two options there, isn't there? One is I can join the military, and the other one is I can break into the building. And I thought, well, I don't want to join the military, and breaking into the building might get me shot. So, I got bored with that, and I haven't been able to get any solid evidence. So that's where that lies. But in the pursuit of that, I became aware of the fact that there's a long-standing
incestuous relationship between government and big business. And a good one to look at is War is a Racket by General Smedley Butler from World War One. Are you familiar with that book?
Yes. And all wars are banker wars.
Yeah.
Now, Warren,
that's right. Bankers, by the bankers, for the bankers.
I did interrupt you, but I want to go back to your experience with trying to gain parental rights, visiting rights, having your child for a month a year. We sort of left off there. So let's go back to where you were trying to challenge the system to actually get your children so that you could visit them, when you went to visit there for a month a year. So talk to us about that process.
Okay. So I'd just like to, if you don't mind, I'd just like to just briefly wrap up that last statement. So I noticed that I started reading books about what is the government hiding from me and what is big business hiding from me, and I came across this psychiatry thing, and that's part of their machine, that's part of the military industrial complex, I believe. So I was very much aware of the dirty tricks that psychiatry was up to. But anyway, the custody thing, so I went to the court, started a court case to A, get my children back, B, place them in the care of their closest possible Finnish family member, and C, improve my parental rights, which again was ridiculous in hindsight, because what is the point? I mean, if they're not going to respect the first court order, why would they respect the second court order? What is the point of even bothering with that? It seems to me now that the only hope I've got is, if I was extremely wealthy, and I could have, imagine if I'd have set foot in Finland in 2003 with, let's say, the 3 best human rights lawyers in Europe that were just literally following me around every step I took. And I didn't speak a word to my ex-wife or these psychiatrists. That the psychiatrists would speak to them, and then they would speak to me, and then I would give my answer, and they would relay it to the psychiatrist. Imagine the effect that would have created. And then every time I saw my children, if the 3 best human rights lawyers in Europe were right there with me, I don't think, if I had that much wealth, I could have also had a media campaign going at the same time, as well as a court case going at the same time. I think they would have buckled. I think they would have instantly buckled. And as a matter of fact, if I had that much money, I've no doubt I could have corrupted a team of psychiatrists that would have went to jail and swore in a stack of Bibles that I'm the best father they've ever met on the entire planet, and that they should give my child back immediately. They basically they said, well, we don't care about this court order, and you can't have your visiting rights. And the result was that they so this court case, when I began the court case, my ex-wife and the psychiatrist, they counterattacked with demands to deny me all further communication with my children and take away their last names. And my lawyer advised me that I had to drop the case because I could only expect a worse result. And what would be a worse result? Well, they could totally deny me all contact with my children and take away their last names. As it stands, they still have their last names, and I have a very little contact with them. And as a matter of fact, up until 2009, my children were begging to return to Australia with me. But when I returned in 2011, in 2009, I was allowed to see there was a children's home, and I was allowed to visit my children there where they were staying in 2009. And I used to be able to talk to my older son, William, in his room privately, and I was sneaking him vitamins, and I explained to him that those psychiatric drugs were bad, and he was throwing them down the toilet, and he said, I feel better. And he said that this psychiatrist who was caring for William, he said that she is a shithead. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word on your program. But anyway, that's what he said. But anyway, so, William was completely on my side. Mikhail was completely on my side. And, but when I got back in 2011, something changed. I think, you're familiar with the concept of pain, drug, hypnosis?
Yes.
All right. Well, where is the pain? Well, for one thing, the drugs cause pain, and they pin him to the ground for hours at a time if he rebels against them. So, there's your pain and there's your drugs, and your hypnosis. Well, while he's being, physically, assaulted and drugged, they're telling him, do this or else. So that's a form of hypnosis, and he may have even been hypnotized by these psychiatrists, because they do that. The point is, when I arrived in Finland in 2011, William, I was trying to sneak him vitamins. He wouldn't take them, and I pulled him to one side, and I said, William, I want to tell you something. And out of the hearing range of this social worker, I do know his name. I will mention it should I ever get the chance in a court of law, but now that I'm starting to get media attention, I have to begin to be careful about naming these people, because the Finnish government may decide to take legal action against me. But it's a dangerous game I'm playing. Like, the more media attention I get, the more likely I am to get legally attacked in Finland. And I think it's a bit like this. If I could sell 10,000 books in Finland, the Finnish government would start a file on me, the Finnish secret police. And if I could sell 100,000 books in Finland, they might decide to, put me in jail or assassinate me. But if I could sell 1 million books in Finland, I think they would be the ones that would be put in jail or hung.
Yeah. Well, Warren,
so this is a world we live in.
You do, and you raise a very important point, and I wonder if you could talk to us about what you have witnessed about the complicity of the media and the government in Finland, because I'd like our conversation obviously to move into Finland is a very centralised government real experiment. A lot of the Scandinavian countries are very much socialist countries which have huge social programs, including programs like, looking after children under psychiatric care and all of these other social programs that integrate a large part of the population in with the government and teaching the population to be dependent upon government. Could you talk to us about, what your experience is with media in Finland and how difficult it has been with the language barrier in trying to get your story told over there?
Well, I think the main problem is that the Finnish mass media, I prefer to call them the Finnish corporate media, they are subsidised by the government. And I met a man who had his own current affairs show in Finland in 2007, and he told me that he liked the story, but he was afraid to one of the big stations, and he said he liked the story, but he was afraid to put it on because he was afraid that the Finnish medical industry would sue him. And so, my goal is to force the corporate media to cover the story, get in through the back door via the alternative media. But however, these days I wonder, like the so-called mass media, which is really the corporate media, is becoming so discredited that the alternative media is perhaps moving to the forefront. So I don't know if you could call the corporate media the mass media anymore. Perhaps the mass media is the alternative media, but anyway, but the point is, the more media coverage I can get, the harder it is, the more likely the Finnish government is to bend to my will or to attack me. And so, but it's a very interesting story. Like, I think that this welfare system is if you want to domesticate a wild animal, the way to do it, like say, in the old days, you're living in a village on the edge of the forest, so you chuck some food out. Let's say a wolf, you chuck some food out, and it, near the edge of the fort, and the wolf comes and gets it, and the next day you bring it drop the food a bit closer and a bit closer and a bit closer, and then you put the food inside a pen, and then you let the wolf come and go for maybe a week, and then you shut the pen, and then this is the beginning of the family dog, isn't it? But so I think the welfare system, you see, if you want to make money in this world, you can if you want to make money, you can work for somebody. If you want to make a lot of money, you can work for yourself. If you want it to make criminal amounts of money, for example, one form of business is a farm. Now, if you want to make a lot of money, you can have a big farm. But if you want to make more money than anybody else, you farm humans. And this is what these governments and royal families do. And so one way to do that is to make the family or the citizens dependent on the state. And I think probably the two biggest enemies of the state or the royal families, which are the same thing, is the church and the family, because a good, big, strong family has the potential to be fully independent, self-protecting, self-governing, self-providing, self-educating, and the church is really an extension of that. If you've got a good church, they can have a big, strong community, and they can be all those things too, but and even stronger. And so, a major blow to religion was dealt in 1917 when the Russian communist government took the power of divorce away from the church and gave it to the state. And many other governments around the world quickly adopted the same policy. And so that was a major blow to the independence of the church and the family. And then they began busting up families, and then introduced welfare to make the family dependent on that. So this is a process of domestication. So they're farming humans. And this is what I believe from what I have read. And so interestingly, the most powerful families, like the ancient royal and industrial families and banking families, they get the lion's share of the money. The super rich, those people, the ruling class, I call them, they tax the working class and to justify it by caring for the poor. However, it seems to me that out of every dollar that they take, that 90 cents of it goes to the super rich in offshore tax havens. And so this is how it's done. It's a bit like a shell game. You take from the super rich, use the politicians to take from the working class to give to the poor. So it's the super rich, the politicians, the working class, and the poor. So it's a four-piece shell game. It's a little bit complicated, but just a little bit out of sight of the public. It's not really that complicated at all, but it's just a little bit complicated, and the general public, I believe, have never looked at it like that.
You're absolutely right, and we talk about this all the time on our program, how the real enemy of the statist thinker and the statist system is individuality. And that individuality is what the state seeks to take out of every person. And if they can take the children off the parents and, as you've said, destroy the family, the autonomy of the family, the ability of the father and mother to make the decisions for the well-being of their children, and the state comes in and says, no, we know what's best for your children. And in your case, I mean, this is a perfect example, but unfortunately it had the complicity of the mother, who basically enlisted the state to take away your place as a father in the home, and even with your children. But I want to, before we go any further, Warren, could you speak to us about the amount of different avenues you went to, like the police, solicitors, the courts? Was there any hope in any form of government or a department of government, either in Finland or in Australia, that offered you some hope to gain some sort of parental rights in seeing your children or having some form of even casual custody?
Well, I returned to Australia I stayed in Finland, I think, for about 3 weeks in 2003, the beginning of 2003. And when I returned to Australia, there was a woman called Helen Tooth, and according to the Attorney General himself, I can't remember his name, but he said that she was the most experienced person in Australia on the Hague Convention. And she told me that because I had visited Finland, I had acquiesced and I had forfeited all rights to a Hague application. And so also it's my experience with contacting these government people in Finland and Australia, or my belief anyway, that the Finnish government does not care and the Australian government cares even less. And therefore, for every contact, every 100 people in the Finnish government I've contacted one person in the Australian government. I found a barrister, an Australian barrister in 2008, and he promised much, but sadly nothing ever came of that. And I found a man in Ireland in 2011, and he claimed to be a medical doctor and a recipient of a number of human rights awards. He was living in Ireland, and he also claimed to be a member of an Irish royal family. I mean a Swedish royal family, but I do have, again, his full details. I know who he is, but he told me he'd been to not Zurich, where's that place? Strasbourg, where the European Court of Human Rights is, and met with some barristers, and he told me he was getting the ball rolling, and he said, he was very intent on helping me, and this all sounded very, very wonderful, but sadly nothing ever came of it, and the communication just faded away, and I don't know if he really was who he claimed to be, or if he found something more important to do, or if he was intimidated in some way. But that came to nothing, which was very disappointing. But so I've been, basically, I work a lot. You see, that's part of the problem. Like, if I had more time, if I was a computer nerd and I could spend all my days just tapping away on this computer, I'm sure I could have drummed up far more support through the media, and maybe even found a good lawyer, a good human rights lawyer. But I work a lot, and my the enormous expense of these trips to Finland and the lawyers and it's my own day-to-day living, and I do have a fair few debts as a result of this as well, and so I'm trapped. I work, most of the time I just work, and I bang away on my smartphone, and I wrote most of my book on the smartphone. But if I could send 100 or 1,000 emails to the media every day, and 1,000 emails to lawyers every day, instead of by the time I'm always editing my book, I'm always improving that. But by the time I, do some work on that and answer my emails and, contact a few people in stolen moments at work, there's my day over,
Understand.
But
Warren, what I'd like to ask you is, the last several times that you did visit your boys and actually have contact with them, what was your feeling regarding their response to you? Do you feel there is still a bond between your sons and yourself, and still a desire from them to actually be with you? Is that the last times that you did see them, or when you do even speak to them on the phone? I understand you are able to ring them occasionally. Do you feel there is still a bond between you and your sons?
Well, as far as my son Mikhail goes, that's an odd story in itself. He lives in a foster home, and these people have custody of my son, and they're a couple. I don't think they're married. I think they're about 40 years old, and they're interesting in a number of ways because, for one thing, they're both lawyers. And so I think this is, are you familiar with well, you've no doubt heard the words covert hostility, but I believe that everything these psychiatrists and social workers do is covert hostility. It's an attack on my family. And even if the individual social worker or psychiatrist may not be an evil person themselves, they're following orders. And if they don't follow those orders, and those orders are designed to damage my family and crush my children's individuality and make them totally dependent on the state. And this drugging is a classic example of that, because they could, for example, rightly point to the drugs now and say to William, because they've been drugging him since 2006, so that's 7 years, they could rightly point to those drugs and say, well, if you go back to your father, he won't let you have these drugs. And William will be wanting those drugs now, because those are amphetamines and he's addicted. He wants them. So they could point to that rightly and say, if you go back to your father, he won't give you these drugs that you really like, that you really need. You know, so just, you know, it's like a tap dripping on a stone. But he was a strong child. He was a brave little soul. Up until 2009, he was completely on my side and begging to come home. But like I said, in 2011, when I got there, he had black rings around his eyes, and he was lacking in energy and very, what else is there? I can't think, but
he was listless, basically listless.
Yeah, he said to me, I've tried to pull him to one side to tell him something in private out of the hearing range of the social worker, and he said to me, I'm not allowed to stand close to you or talk to you unless the social worker can hear what I'm saying. So this is total domination. And I was very angry about this, so I walked over to the social worker and I stood about an inch away from his face and I looked him right in the eye, and he said, move, and I didn't move, and he pushed me and I didn't move. He denied that he pushed me, by the way, in front of his peers at a later meeting, because that could have been a potential assault charge. Anything I can get on these people would be a foot in the door, you know what I mean? But anyway, so he cancelled the meeting, and that was that. But William, I've not been able to get William on the phone. Earlier this year, William phoned me because he wanted a computer game, a Nintendo or something, and it was, he really wanted it. So he knew that, no one else was going to give it to him except me. So he contacted me, and we had a conversation for about a week or so on the phone, and eventually I managed to get that thing for him, which was quite difficult, because this children's home, when I phone them, they normally don't answer the phone, and when they do answer, they normally hang up on me, and they never let me speak to William. They never even give me the opportunity to speak to William. So I've got no reason to trust these people. And this is a perfect environment for a sadist or a pedophile. This is obviously the most evil people in Finland behind this psychiatry thing, and I think it's ultimately the bankers that are behind it. And so the fact. Well, I've got a letter from a social worker where she says I'm not allowed to send a doctor or a lawyer or a priest or a representative of a human rights organization or a private detective to visit my own children. And so on top of that, when I made a complaint with the Finnish police about, the brutal mistreatment of my children, the policeman told me I had to complain to Valvira, and Valvira is the Finnish Medical Investigation Board, and the man I had to meet there was a psychiatrist himself, and he told me that so you basically that's the wolf guarding the chicken house, and so it'd be like asking. It'd be like complaining to Adolf Hitler about Heinrich Himmler, Well, and anyway, he said
the thing is, the system is there to protect itself, and you know, you've got this psychiatrist who's in charge of the complaints towards psychiatrists. Now he's got to protect that industry, and we talk about this all the time about the medical cartel and how the psychiatry industry is just something that is only, as you alluded to earlier, has only just grown over the last 100+ years. And many years ago, they've got this DSM, which is all of their psychiatric conditions, the manual that they get, and every year they just add to it. But there is not one physical test for any of those conditions in there. It is purely subjective to a psychiatrist opinion. And this is a thing that people don't understand about psychiatry. It is a developed industry, and basically, as you've experienced, it is there working with the medical cartel to protect that industry, which is a huge multi-billion-dollar industry every year for that cartel. Yeah.
Well, see, so if I witness if I make a criminal complaint against a Finnish psychiatrist, I've got a complaint to a psychiatrist at Valvira, and if he decides that there's criminal activity on the part of the other psychiatrist, and only then if he makes a complaint about it to the Finnish police, only then will the Finnish police make a criminal charge against the psychiatrist. And this psychiatrist also told me they normally don't investigate unless there's a death. So this is literally the ultimate haven for a sadist or a pedophile, is the Finnish psychiatric social worker industry. And on the subject of the drugs, I have read in places that the markup on these drugs is phenomenal, like many thousands of %. So it would be great to get a full, because I've no doubt they're keeping very accurate records, because in Finland they're a wealthy country and they're very efficient. They remind me of the Germans. They're very efficient, but they're efficient and they're wealthy, but they're also very obedient to the state, you know. So I've no doubt they've got fully accurate records of every pill they've given my son. It'd be wonderful to get a full list of the brand names and the quantities, and I think that if you was to add up the total cost that children's home is, and the latest place my son is staying in is very interesting, because they've actually moved him. Not only have they separated my children from me, then my wife deserted them, and then the state separated my children from each other. And now my son William is living hundreds of miles north of Helsinki in a children's home run by an organisation called Medical. And I've looked it up. It's an organisation that provides medical services, and it's got a government contract to do so. So I believe this is the end game. I believe he's been sent there to die or become a vegetable, whichever comes first. And so if he becomes a vegetable, well, then he'll transfer to some adult facility and spend the rest of his short life being ripped apart by psychiatric drugs. And then, of course, once the physical damage sets in, that'll involve surgery. And so you can imagine the bill for that. And then they'll need even more drugs, the psychiatric drugs, plus the drugs to counteract the operations, plus the drugs to counteract the damage of the psychiatric drugs. So in these dying days, I suspect in the last year of his life, they will, the Finnish, the Medical and the drug companies will make more out of him in 1 year than they've made out of him in, let's say, the previous 20.
Yes. Now, if I could just ask something here about this corporation that's looking after him. Is this a private corporation? Because what I see here is, what we've been studying is taking place worldwide under these socialist, fascist type systems that are developing. Yeah. You've got this public-private partnership between private corporations like the one that's looking after William, and basically they're billing the state for caring for William, and so the more care he needs, the more profit that corporation makes. And this is like modern fascism, where you've got this, like under Agenda 21, where we've got public-private partnerships forming, where the private corporations are the one that provide these services, if you like, to the government, and the government is held captive to paying them, and there's a loop that continues to go around where there's a dependence on government with these public-private partnerships, but these private corporations, they're the ones making the mega dollars with big pharma behind them.
Yeah, well, in my observation from what I've read and what I've chosen to believe, I mean, who really knows anything in this world? But one has to have an opinion. And I think that probably the best word, my favourite word in the whole world is apparency. So it appears to me, because if God created the world, then it's an illusion anyway, right? So the whole thing's an apparency. So who knows anything? I mean, ultimately you might know the ultimate truth about yourself and about God, but I think everything in this universe is literally an illusion. It's from what I've read and what I've chosen to believe, it appears to me that what we're witnessing, this industrial monster that's almost controlling the planet, emanated from the banking families of the Roman Empire.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, and then it track forward. You've got the royal families of Europe, which are all inbred and related to these Roman banking families, and so they're basically using government. These royal families and banking families, let's just call them industrial families, big industrial families, whether it be banks or car factories or bomb factories or whatever. These inbred families at the top, they're using government to rape the middle class until they've got nothing left to give. And then you send them to war to get rid of them. But I believe that there's a darker agenda here. The psychiatry is and this sums it up. This just shows you how deep the evil goes. Like there was a Swiss psychiatrist by the name of Ernst Ruden, and he was the head of Hitler's eugenics program, and he was quoted as saying, "Until the political activity of Adolf Hitler, and only through his work, has our 30-year-long dream of translating racial hygiene into action finally become a reality." Now, it seems to me that if there was any sanity in the Finnish government and the legal system at the top, or even at the lower levels, I'm sure that they're not all evil. I mean, I'm sure that many people in the lower levels in the Finnish Justice Department are not evil, but they're like intimidated or brainwashed, at best. So I should be able to walk into that Finnish police department, to the lowest person in there, and should be able to put that quote from Ernst Ruden on the table and say, "Look at this." And if they had any self will, they should be able to look at that and say, "Well, okay, so if this quote is true, that means psychiatry is totally evil and has no place in my country, and I will not rest until every psychiatric industry in Finland is shut down and every psychiatrist in Finland is put on trial." Just from that one quote alone, that should be sufficient evidence.
Or further, even at a very basic level, even at a very basic human level, if people weren't so compartmentalised into trusting government and the legal system and the social structures that have been developed, which they are compartmentalised to believe that they must follow and stay a part of, a human being should be able to walk in and say, "Listen, I'm a father of these two children. I've been denied visiting rights. Can you help me?" And from a very basic human level, that's all you should have to say. And then say, "Well, look, I'll look into it. I'll see what I can do." But the legal system itself has been built in this thing called society, where it is being built to make a slave of all people, and that people must become slaves to that legal system and to those constraints. But Warren, we're coming to the close of our hour, and I'd like to get you to speak about where to from here for you. I mean, obviously you want to gain custody of your children. You want to have them back. That's the game. That's the obvious end game. But even now, what is your short-term aims? I mean, here we are talking. I know we've got about 10,000 listeners to this program, and hopefully they'll be able to share it further. But talk to us about where to from here, and obviously what your hopes are in the immediate future.
Well, I hope that like I said, if I had a lot of money, I could hire the best human rights lawyers in Europe and start my own media campaign and really embarrass the Finnish government and bring them to the bargaining table. But failing that, I'm trying to get more and more media coverage, and I'm hoping that either if I can sell enough books, or even just get more and more media attention, then maybe one day, I think that this will embarrass the Finnish government, and they will. I do believe if I could get enough media attention, I don't know what the critical point would be, but I'm guessing if 10% of the Finnish people were to hear my story and recognise it as being true, I think the Finnish government could not withstand the will of those 10% of the Finnish people, and they would give my children back to me. And, as I said, plan B would be to give my children to the closest possible to many Finnish family members. And, so that would be a stepping stone to me getting my children back. And also, number one is the drugging of William, of course. He's in a life-threatening position. And, all the Finnish police have to do is say to the psychiatrist, produce the scientific proof that this child has an illness. Matter of fact, I got a statement from one psychiatrist who says who admits that they have no scientific proof that he has any illness of any kind. But the sad part is that if they don't stop drugging him, he soon will. He'll have an illness caused by the drugs, which will require drugs to alleviate the damage caused by the other drugs. So all the Finnish police have to do is say, produce your scientific evidence that this child has an illness requiring these drugs, and produce your scientific evidence that these drugs cure this illness. And then they're gone. They're history. They're in jail. I mean, that's all the Finnish police have to do. But the way the system works is a social worker has got more authority than a policeman, and a psychiatrist has got more authority than a social worker. But I'd really like to know how much money the drug companies put into the Finnish psychiatric industry. Like, for example, do they pay for these psychiatrists' university fees? Do they donate hospital buildings? Do they give these psychiatrists jobs, consultancy jobs, where they pay them large sums of money? And but on the subject of these two lawyers that are looking after my son Mikhail, I wanted to make a point about that. They're both lawyers. Now, it's very interesting because this is covert hostility or harm in the name of help, in that these two lawyers, even if they are decent people, they're intimidated or brainwashed by the social workers. And if they do anything to help me improve my parental rights, they risk losing custody of the child to me.
Exactly.
And if they do anything to help me improve my parental rights, they risk the social workers taking the child away from them.
Exactly.
And giving him to somebody else.
Yes.
And I'd also like to know, do they get any money for caring for him? And also, even more, these people appear to be wealthy. Perhaps they've even bribed these social workers to give the child to them. Maybe they really want a child, and these social workers have said, well, hey, we've got 100 people wanting this child. What are you going to do for us?
I could almost guarantee
right.
you that they would be being paid for looking after the child, because that's a basic system of socialism, that dependence.
Yeah. So these people are trapped, and at the same time, the Finnish government can argue, look, if these two upstanding Finnish citizens, these two lawyers, do not see anything wrong with the treatment of these two children, then obviously it's okay.
Yep.
So there again is your covert hostility, your harm in the name of help. Right? So the beauty of these people just goes on and on. I mean, but they're very clever. They've been at this for a long time, for, like I said, thousands of years. And the legal system is just designed by the rich for the rich.
Well, Warren, look, we're out of time, but I will leave the show notes to our listeners where they can actually obtain your book, The Dark Side of Finland, and I will put the YouTube also with the show notes so people can watch that. But Warren, I hope that this sharing your story on Fairdinkum Radio might be just another way that more people can become aware. And look, my heart goes out to you. I can't imagine what you've been through, but as you've said, you've just got to keep going. Obviously, you want to be in in relationship with your boys forever, and their health is of utmost concern. But Warren, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for sharing your story on Fairdinkum Radio. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Leon. I appreciate it very much too. And hopefully some of your kind listeners could help me make this story more well known.
Great work. Thanks, mate.